Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Friday at 9:37. Hope everyone's doing good. It is a pretty nice, warm, well, unusually warm day today. It's supposed to get almost to the 50s, I believe, from what I heard for tomorrow, which is Saturday. Yesterday was so warm. Where I work at the Montessori school, so I'm part of the aftercare team. So basically, what I do there is basically hang out with the kids for a few hours every day until they get picked up by their parents. So we try to keep them outside and try to be outside as much as we can because of their crazed energy after being cooped up all day. But yesterday was crazy because it was so warm and it was just muddy everywhere. I wore too many layers. It felt spring like. I actually saw somebody during the day, and there was actually somebody at school, a kid that was wearing shorts. Here we are. We just got into February of 2024, middle of winter, and yeah, it's on one hand, I love it. It's great, but on the other hand, it's very strange. And there's still no snow in the forecast, but we'll see. But anyway, I did a show lately. I've been doing well most of the time for the last probably month or so. I've been doing coverage of full coverage. Well, for the most part, full coverage of Game of Thrones, and I just finished up that whole series where I finished up by doing a show on season 6, and I was really kind of let down by that whole series, and it just kind of made me kind of reaffirmed for me my views on television shows. Even though, again, on one hand, there is so many well done, well crafted television shows out there. It's been a weird transition for a lot of directors and also actors. And again, it's mixed. It on one hand, it's really great, and on the other hand, it's as a fan of films, I find it very frustrating. Where a lot of these streaming companies have basically collaborated and worked with a lot of famous directors, and have backed financially a lot of these new projects, but because of that, a lot of these films never get a theatrical release. You have directors like David Fincher, and even Martin Scorsese. Even though Killers of the Flower Moon, he got a full green light from a big studio, and that was obviously in the theater. But The Irishman was one of those examples of where it was only in the theaters for a very short time, but it was mainly just you could only access it through streaming, and I believe that was Netflix. And then David Fincher, he his last two movies, mostly his most recent film, which I believe is The Killer, you can only see that on the through streaming. Very strange, but anyway, I I just can't really at this point really get through TV shows. As great as they are, and as high quality as many of them are. As far as some directors that have you know moved into that direction a little bit more, or just really well crafted shows. I can't get around the fact that movies are just or these TV shows are just a little bit too bloated, a little bit too long, and I always have this problem every time, and I feel at this point it's a valid opinion around it because I don't. I've given it a chance. I have really tried, and I can't. I can't get. I can't get through a series that's been on for 7 or 8 years. Some people have said, well, the way you got to do it is watch one or two episodes a night, and it's like, yeah, okay, I get that. Because you have some shows. Game of Thrones was about an hour or a little bit more each episode. And you have shows that are pretty lengthy as far as episodes go, and some that are short, 45 minutes or so. And so, on one hand, movies that I'll rent at Opera House Video, along with TV shows, if I did it that way for a lot of these giant TV shows, especially Game of Thrones, if I limited myself to watch, say, 1 or 2 episodes a night, I would never be able to finish it because I would get charged for a late fee. So that's one big problem. And the other thing is, well, you got to, people say, well, you got to, you have to have some moderation and not necessarily have to binge everything all the time, where you're just going to be obsessed with it. And when I watch Game of Thrones, I did rip through most of it. Season 1 through 5 is incredible. But I did rip right through it. And I did watch a lot of it. But at the actual time, when I looked at, how long I was actually spending watching this show, it was really, about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours a night. And so that is not very different for me from when I watch movies. I usually watch a movie every night. Sometimes I watch two, so it's like give or take 35 minutes. It's no difference as far as my attention span. But I just can't do it. And so you probably won't see any more coverage of TV shows other than shows that I really, really love, such as my favorite show of all time, True Detective Season 1, in which I've talked about a lot. So, anyway, and I've been doing these music shows, which has been a lot of fun. I've been trying to mix things up. Again, I try to always bring something a little bit new, a little bit fresh. And I've been doing a series of music shows. I did one on Miles Davis Quintet. I did one on Kiss. I did one on a band called Suicide. I did a big show a while back on my favorite music that's been released by my favorite band of all time, Autechre. I did a show on the Chemical Brothers. I did a show on Jimi Hendrix, Band of Gypsies, live at the Fillmore East. And I just did a show on a style of music that actually is a style I really love and is really influential on me. And it's kind of a desired taste kind of a thing, and that is noise music. And I just uploaded a show on my favorite band or artist in that style, Wapstan. So check it out. Again, trying to always bring some variety of different things to the show. So again, whenever I do these shows, I don't usually plan things out way, way in advance. When I used to do shows when I first started doing video presentations, I was doing it just on Facebook Live. And I used to put, a lot of work into doing those videos. I would have notes, I would do all of this research, try to really find out as much as I could about that particular movie or director. And then I would always do promotion around the upcoming video. And it was really great. But then I felt I did that for a long time, and that was just through Facebook. And I felt like after a period of time, I felt like I was kind of doing it for myself in a kind of unnatural way of how I like to talk about movies. And I wanted to try to do it in a more loose, more informal way, but trying to obviously try to keep it focused because it's hard to do that sometimes. But I wanted to have it set up like a conversation. If I was like talking to somebody or talking to a friend, over drinks or food at a bar or someplace, and it was just the topic of conversation where we would talk about a movie or a band or something like that. So I wanted to try to move the way I presented the videos more in that kind of natural setting. I didn't really want to I wanted to have the presentations a little bit more raw, a little bit more unfiltered, uncensored, if you will, or unedited. I just wanted to have it, in the moment. So I know that can be distracting for some people when it's not clearly defined, right in the beginning, or kind of like what I'm doing right now. But I don't know, for what it is, it's the natural way of how I kind of go about my way of processing or trying to explain what's in my brain. So again, I don't really plan out too much about what movies I want to do anymore. There's certain movies, obviously, that I think about, certain topics I want to talk about that are really, really something I'm thinking about a lot, or I get reminded of a movie that I want to talk about this movie. I keep forgetting, or I want to talk about this director, or there's this, issue or subject matter related you know, uh, to the topic of movies, and it might be a little bit, on the side of things, but it's all related. But so today's show, I decided to do a show on a little known movie called The Blair Witch Project. And I realized I've never talked about this movie. I actually have a real connection to this movie. I'm actually a really big fan of this movie. And I think it has kind of a weird reputation around. I think a lot of, from what I've seen it, and again, I'm blown away that Blair Witch Project came out in 1999, and here we are, 2024, and it's 24 years old. Like, that's nuts to me. And so I, you know, actually a huge fan of this movie. But what I've seen in the last, 15, 20 years or so since the movie's come out, most people really kind of shit on this movie. A lot of people, I see it every now and then. It comes up in a review, or, you know, or it's related to some kind of topic in horror, and the movie comes up, and a lot of people always trash this movie and say how it's overly hyped. It's really not that great. It was all, a big air filled balloon that didn't really have any substance and all these things. There's obviously people who really think the movie was terrific, and is actually at face value a really great film. And I've kind of always felt that way about the Blair Witch Project. So I've figured, and again, it's kind of a, to a degree, it's kind of a controversial movie because of all of the press and all the marketing around the film. It was and what it did when it actually came out, in the face of film box office. It, to a degree, was kind of a cultural phenomenon, and it really, for good or bad, and it really, changed cinema. It actually started for the most part, even though there have been films and things that have done the found footage kind of thing before, to a degree. Blair Witch Project was the one, I think, that really, for the most part, kicked off, or started its own genre of filmmaking, especially in horror. And and now there are so many movies that are, that are a part of, say, quote unquote, the found footage style of filmmaking, especially in the horror world. So I was like, you know what? I should talk about this movie. And unfortunately, I don't own Blair Witch Project on Blu-ray. I only have it on DVD. I have a really good edition of it on DVD. It would be cool to buy it on Blu-ray at some point. I'm not sure why I haven't, but it's a it's a movie that I think was a phenomenon when it came out. There are certain films that come out and really, massively affect, say, that culture at the time. I think certain films offhand, movies that really have that kind of cultural effect, where it's beyond, say, just ticket sales. Movies like The Exorcist, William Friedkin's Exorcist. I think that movie definitely is one of those movies. I think movies like Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg. I even think a movie like James Cameron's Avatar is a movie like that, that really had a cultural impact. Another one would be Titanic. Movies that, Star Wars, the Lord of the Ring movies, the first three. Movies that really touch a certain chord in our culture, and for good or bad, reaches such an audience that it doesn't really, it doesn't really, it has an appeal like across the boards to some degree, and it inspires a lot of people, and it also, people will see that particular film over and over again, and people will, to some degree, well, like Jaws, for instance, can actually, change your behavior where you're suddenly afraid to go into the ocean. So, it's another one would be, which is around the same time, would be M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense. That movie was a cultural phenomenon. It was more than just a movie. And again, it doesn't really matter. It's not really a question if the movie was good or not, or if you like the movie or you don't like the movie. It's still like those films. I feel had a cultural effect. They really affected people for good or bad, and it was this perfect storm, if you will, when those particular films came out. And the Blair Witch Project, again, it's hard to believe it came out in 1999. And it was directed by Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick, and it was these two directors. It was their first film that they had put out, and this movie was, you know, um, such an incredibly low budget film, to put it mildly. It was the first film of its kind of where, and again, this was in '99, so the internet was still internet, and then how movies were promoted. All of these things were, to a degree, still in its infancy. But these guys, these filmmakers, the people involved with Blair Witch Project, at that point and at that time, they were on the cusp of, say, of how you can, build up hype, but then how you can effectively use social media to get asses in the chairs to see your movie. The marketing campaign that these guys used and had was, unlike anything that had ever come before they came along. And even today, I would say it's still unique. It was such a unique time, and it was ahead of its time, and I still can't say I've seen anything that had that incredible use of like a full-on campaign to to market a movie. I mean, it was unprecedented, and even by today's standards. You have certain films that studios will get behind, that will use, spend millions and millions of dollars to get people to come see it. One movie I would say, Killers of the Flower Moon, the latest Martin Scorsese movie, which is a phenomenal movie. That movie had, I don't know the exact figure or numbers, but that movie had a unprecedented amount of promotion around it. Something like over $100 million, where they used it just to market the film. But the movie itself, for all intents and purposes, I think it's an incredible movie. But for all intents and purposes, it died. It did not make any money at all in the box office. And it's interesting, that movie is going to be up. It is up for a bunch of Academy Awards, and it has Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, directed by Martin Scorsese. It's got all of these pluses for it, all of these huge iconic names attached to it. But the movie is very, very dark. It's kind of slow, and it's a real hard subject to really talk about. But it is a fabulous movie, and it's I think it's one of his best films, Scorsese, in recent years. But that being said, this movie completely tanked, and it had an unprecedented marketing campaign, huge star power, but it died. It died in the box office. And it's funny because the movie is, I see a lot of interviews with DiCaprio and the people involved with the film, especially around the campaign of them trying to get the movie seen by people, trying to get people on board to like maybe put pressure on the powers that be to nominate for big awards, all of these things. And it's like been this storm of where they're continually doing these Q&As, these interviews, and so much press. I've never seen a movie that has been so high profile as far as the actors and the filmmakers themselves still actively campaigning for their movie after it's come out. But the interesting thing is, I've seen interviews with Scorsese and DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, uh, De Niro. I've seen lots of interviews around it with them, and not once has anybody ever addressed the cold hard dark truth that the movie was a total shit turd in the box office. And it's kind of weird. It's kind of off putting that nobody has really. It feels like it's the elephant in the room. No one wants to talk about it, even though if you look at the numbers, the movie has done nothing. But yet it's got all of this acclaim. It's got all of this stuff around it. So it's interesting. And I will say honestly, it's a little bit. I'm a little bit turned off, and I'm a little bit disgusted. Again, they can do whatever the hell they want to do, but I'm a little bit turned off. I'm a little bit disgusted by the kind of gross use of, or I should say, the gross amount of money that was used to market this movie. Where, there could have been 30 movies made for that price tag. Like it's insane, and I just feel like, you know, it's kind of gross, and it kind of, as much as I love DiCaprio and Scorsese, one of my favorite directors, I have to say when I learned about that, it kind of diminished a little bit around my personal acclaim for the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, and also with them as actors and movers and shakers, key figures in the world of film. I was a little bit turned off. I'm like, it's kind of gross how you can spend that much money, but just to market your film. But it is what it is. Blair Witch Project did something unprecedented when it came out. It came out in '99. They really hyped this movie, the campaign that they used, and considering this movie was made for $100,000, I believe, and it made, I believe it made millions and millions of dollars, close to maybe $1 billion when it came out. And this movie was basically, essentially, as low budget as you can possibly get. To a degree, it harkened back to the the exploitation period, where movies are made for $50,000 sometimes, like just insane, and or $100,000, movies like say that were made by Herschel Gordon Lewis, to that in that capacity or in that light, it kind of harkens back to that true like guerrilla style filmmaking. But this movie has a very different vibe. It's not an exploitation movie that way, but there are things about it that are very similar. And I remember hearing about this movie and the whole thing around this movie, around the campaign before it came out, was that this movie was hyped that this movie was real. It was a real documentary about these young people who had decided to do this kind of research project about this legend, this supposed legend of this Blair witch, of this witch that lived in the woods and would kidnap and eat children, basically. And it was like this. It was made and hyped into where it was this true folkloric tale, but it was based in reality, where these supposed uh, group of filmmakers decided to make a documentary about finding out the truth, interviewing people in the town, um, of that supposedly had experiences around, and it took place in a small town called Burkittsville. It was set up like it was a true story, and what happened was that these filmmakers during this whole video, or during this whole project, they actually went missing and were never found in the woods. And I have to say, like, the campaign was so strong around this movie. Before I eventually saw Blair Witch Project, and I did see it in the theater, I was kind of convinced, like, wow, is this really true? Like, is this actually did someone actually find the video of them, of their journey, and of them being kidnapped and or disappearing or being murdered? Like, is that a real thing? And I at one point believed that that's what this was, and it was literally a found footage thing. And I had kind of mixed reservations about it because I was like, well, I don't want to necessarily, if these people were killed, I don't really, not really into watching, true murder, on the screen. But it was fascinating, and I at one point was totally convinced that this was something that was kind of real, based on real accounts, and something that supposedly happened to these people. And at the time, back in '99, I had I've talked about this period a lot, and this was like the period when, I'd been out of college for a few years, and in college, and actually before, I'd always had a, deep love for films, but it wasn't until I got out of college. I owned a few movies before that period, but in the '90s, obviously that was the DVD explosion, and so, when I was pretty much getting out of college, I got really into certain films and filmmakers when I was in college, big time, because of some friends that I had. And so I really got into movies at that point. And I started, during that period, I started buying movies. I started basically a collection of movies. And I started buying a ton of DVDs at that time. And I got like a DVD player, I got a sound system. So I was like getting into it pretty seriously at that point. And I had a little circle of friends at the time. Everybody has kind of, got married or has had kids and moved away. That group doesn't really exist anymore. But I had a little core of friends that they were really into movies and stuff too, and we were into a lot of the same music. But we used to go to the movies almost every weekend during that time, during the '90s, the late '90s to like '99, early 2000s. We used to go to the movies all the time, and I found myself going to the movies almost every weekend. It was great, it was awesome. And so, the same group of friends, we wanted to go see Blair Witch after hearing all of this hype and this, seeing this incredible campaign, and we all kind of believed that this thing was real to a degree. So I never forget, we went to go see it. It was on a beautiful. I don't know. I think it came out during the summertime, the summer of '99, I believe. And we went to. We decided to go see it at a matinee, and I was really nervous. Well, not nervous, but I was really, really excited to see this movie. But I was like wondering, wow, is this like a real thing? Like, I was convinced of it. And we ended up going to see it at Flagship Cinema down in Thomaston, and we went to the early show. We went to see it, of all times. We went to the noon, 12 o'clock show, and it was really funny because it was a beautiful summer day, and here we are. We were going to go see this really dark and supposedly terrifying movie, and so we went to it, and when it started, I was totally hooked. I believed there was a level of realism to the movie that I was automatically, in it to win it. I thought the cast was great. I felt like the lines that were blurred between, kind of like a reality TV show or something that you were seeing, of where it was either a pure documentary or it was a fictional documentary or a nonfiction documentary, blurred with the line of a fictional movie. That line to me was kind of erased with this film. I at face value, I believed, what I was seeing on the screen was really these young filmmakers it was their reality. They were essentially playing themselves. It was their experience, and we were seeing the after, the post, viewing of what really happened and their experience. Traveling to this town and interviewing all of these folks, um, diving into the folkloric aspect of it, but then also trying to focus on the supposed true crimes and murders that happened around the story. And I totally was, for all intents and purposes, this marketing that they used, um, for me and for millions of other people, absolutely worked on the highest level. The cast was phenomenal. You had Heather Donahue, um, Joshua Leonard, Michael C. Williams, um, Patricia Ducoa. And it's funny, I've seen some of these actors in a few movies since then. Not high profile movies, but I have seen them in certain movies and certain things. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's the guy or the girl. That's Heather from Blair Witch Project. They never went on to become megastars, but I've seen them in lots of movies, different low budget movies, bigger budget movies, and they tend to play smaller roles. Um, so it's kind of, it's always funny. But in all honesty, when I watched this Blair Witch Project, I was totally into it, and I was like feeling like this is a different experience than any other horror movie. It's separate from any other horror film that I have seen, or any other experience that I've had around a horror film, because it felt so real. It felt like you were seeing something that was, all intents and purposes, was steeped in reality. So it had this very different look, and it was, obviously it was so raw. It was literally these guys and girls walking around, spending most of the time in the woods with a camera. There was no special effects. There was zero, I guess you could say, jump scares. It did away. It had no. What I really loved about it was that it had none of the traditional, you know, horror tropes that we've seen a billion times. Some of those tropes are great. I mean, you have those. They're popular for a reason, but there's such an abundance of them, and they're used all the time. They're used by a lot of Hollywood directors to, you know, uh, give people a sense of normalcy, or a sense of the same, so they will, and a level of familiarity, so, where the filmmakers believe, are, these things work because uh, they've been done over and over again, and they kind of feel that while the audience, to a degree, is stupid, and that they can fall for the same prank every time, and it's kind of ridiculous. There's been a big backlash about that, but this Blair Witch had none of that. It had none of those, like, typical tropes that you see in horror films. Again, there was no practical effects. Well, there was practical effects, but it was so minimalist. There was no CGI. There was no use of computer. It was basically just somebody running around in the woods, with a camera. Literally, that's what it was. And I have to say, by the end of this film, and it really reaches a level of intensity that at that time I had never really experienced, especially seeing a new movie, and especially seeing in the theater. I have to say, my first experience around this movie was that it terrified the shit out of me. I legitimately got, like, terrified, and I was scared. And I remember I was, after the movie was over, and we got up and walked out. I was so happy to be. I was so happy that it was like a beautiful sunny day. I felt like it relieved my anxiety around this movie. And I, at that time, and even today, I had not really ever had that experience. As big of, I'm a huge fan of horror, obviously, but I never had a movie like get under my skin like that, where it generally freaked me out and scared me. And I was like, this movie, is an experience, And I remember talking to people after, and the movie went on to become this giant phenomenon. It set records everywhere. It made millions, if not billions, of dollars. It spawned a franchise, which unfortunately is not good. The rest of there's two or three other movies that were tied to the original, and they are absolutely terrible movies. Um, but I remember talking to people that I knew, friends or what have you, that did not like this movie. They didn't get it. They didn't really. They thought it was super cheesy and ridiculous, and they didn't get it. They were really um, down on the movie because of the campaigning, and that they were like, well, what do these filmmakers think? They think we're idiots, that we're gonna believe that this whole thing really happened, and it's clearly just bullshit. It's just a marketing campaign, and they felt like that they were being insulted by that. Again, for me, it worked. I went along for the ride, and I totally enjoyed it, and I totally was thrilled. And of course, in the following years, the movie became, divided and divisive because people, on one hand, like me, who found it to be a really great, thrilling horror movie, and then other people who were just like, oh, it's all bullshit. Like, how can you buy into it? But I was of the camp where I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was, on one hand, I thought Blair Witch was a total, well, first and foremost, I thought it was a total breath of fresh air. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen in the genre before. I thought for what it was, and it was pure guerrilla filmmaking. But I thought for what it was incredibly innovative. I thought it was especially way ahead of its time, so ahead of its time. And I thought the marketing and the idea of how they put this whole kind of package together was genius. And I felt like with all of the hype going into it, I felt there was a payoff. It came out. You realize, after seeing the movie and reading about it, that it was, purely a fictional thing. It wasn't true, but it was so well done. Like, that's what I want for a movie experience. I want to have that primal, thing of where it gets in your under your skin, and it won't leave. Like, that's the experience that I want to have, and it really delivered that. And the movie, for what it was unlike anything else. And of course, it spawned this massive genre or subgenre of horror, because after that, we've had, I don't know how many, probably hundreds of, quote unquote found footage movies, and franchises too, where there's been all of these horror franchises and movies that are basically trying to capitalize on the same techniques that were used in the Blair Witch Project. And I think there are some movies in the genre itself that are very, very good. But I think, a lot of them are crap, and a lot of them are, overly bloated, and it's clear that they're, trying to copy something that's great, but it does not, even come close. And it's, just clearly, in that case, pure hype. But there are some really good films in that genre. But Blair Witch Project was, for what it is and for what it was, I look at that movie as kind of this trailblazing happening, this trailblazing phenomenon in the world of movies, and especially horror films, for what it did, its campaign, convincing the audience that what you were seeing was real, and actually being super terrifying at times, where there are no traditional Hollywood tropes used, and you get this sense of these people and these kids being lost in the woods, the paranoia that takes over, and the horrific endings to each one of these kids. For what it's worth, I think it's an extraordinary movie. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but every time overall I have seen this movie a bazillion times, and it still has that effect to me. It still like gets to me. I have to say too, I need to get this on Blu-ray. I'm not sure why I don't, but why I don't have it on Blu-ray, but it will be something I need to do at some point. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.